Okay, language. So, language and cognition. So, what is the importance of language in cognition? So, whenever like when it is humans, so unless and until we talk about something, so we cannot communicate things with others. Okay, so human language is a kind of development which represents the unique kind of thinking or the basis of cognition. This is a base for the cognition process. So we have a language that is actually processing in our mind, so which is like we cannot see it, but verbally like we are like trying to think or like trying to imagine with different kind of verbal and non-verbal languages itself, signs also. So signs and all we call it as phenomes. Okay, so language is the basic component for a cognition. So although like when it comes to animals, so even like different birds and different animals like dogs, apes and all the things, so experiments have been conducted to say that even they use the process of language for the communication process and for the cognition process. So even they think in a different way. Different kinds of brain structures will be activated. Similar brain structures will be activated with humans and animals when they start thinking like thinking with different kinds of languages to communicate. So language processing is an important component of information processing and storage. Okay, so it's not only like whenever we say cognition, memory, storage, retrieval, everything came into existence. So language processing is also one of the important component in processing the information that you actually see or else listen or else you see or different with sense organs, whatever you feel. So it is important for you to process and storage. So store whatever you know. So with the particular language itself, so whichever the language, mother tongue maybe you are comfortable with, so you tend to store the information in the same language in the memory system. So language is the main mean of human communication, the way in which most information has been exchanged. So in this case, like whenever like we have to communicate our thought processes, so we are thinking something, so we have to tell that to somebody else. So for this communication process also, to get the information and to exchange the knowledge that we have, so language plays a base for a communication process. And then we have linguistics. So what is this linguistics is? The study of linguistics is the formal description of the structures of language. So including the description of speech, sound, meanings and grammars. So language is something that which contains so all the sounds that we have, meanings and the grammars. So we cannot talk something without all these three. Okay, so we should have some kind of sound. So whenever like different words sounds differently. Okay, so different words have different meanings, so different grammatical statements, so past tense, present tense, so all the things. So we cannot say something wrong and we cannot convey the things that we wanted to convey. Okay, so in that case, so linguistics plays an important role in language. So what is the difference between linguistics and languages? So linguistics is the formal description of different structures of languages, that we call it as linguistics. So sounds is a different structure, meaning is a different structure, grammar is a different structure. That is what is like linguistics, which forms a different structures of languages. Okay, so the structures of languages. So sometimes language will be use our symbols, so which are like sounds, gestures, written characteristics. So language, we talk different languages, so different languages also have different written scripts, so written symbols for that. So a is a different symbol, so French a is a different symbol, Kannada a is a different symbol, Malayalam a is a different symbol. Okay, so each and every language has its own symbols, so written characteristics, so representations of objects, actions, events. So every language will have its own symbolic representations. So language and meaningfulness. So whenever you try to understand or else communicate with some languages, so each and every word of a language will have some kind of meaning to it. Okay, so language is a meaningful one, so therefore it is easy for others and for ourselves to understand the communication process and the cognition process, what others are thinking about. Okay, so language is generative. Okay, So which means that the symbols of the language can be combined to produce an infinite number of messages. So whatever we are talking about, the symbols, meaningfulness, so it's not only that we are not restricting our like symbols and different kinds of meanings. So same meanings can be utilized in different statements, and the same symbols can be utilized in a different paragraphs and stuff. So we can combine. So language is little generative. So we can utilize the same terminology. Sometimes will have multiple meanings also. Okay. So in one statement it produces one meaning. In other statement it produces a different meaning. So in that case, we can use the symbols and the meanings of the same terminologies in a different manner. So that creates an more options to communicate well. Okay, a language has rules that governs how symbols can be arranged. So just because we can utilize more number of symbols and meaningful terminologies, it doesn't mean that we can break the rules. So as we're talking about grammars, so grammars have some kind of rules and regulations. That is, it has tenses, so it has different kinds of grammatical aspects in different languages. So we have to utilize the rules and regulations. So then we have to communicate things appropriately. Okay, the building blocks of languages. So each and every language has its own hierarchies. Okay, so for example, like when we consider English, okay, the very first thing that comes whenever we are learning something, the very first thing that comes is like sounds. So we just learn A, B, C. All these are like letters along with the different sounds. A, we don't say A, that's R. We, so we learn the sounds. So phonemes are nothing but sounds. So then it is like morphemes. So morphemes are something like the terminologies, the sounds which can be combined together to form a words. Okay, so we can form different kinds of words with a different sounds. So now the kid initially, like in the initial stages, the kids will be learning to grab attention only through the sounds. They respond to you only through the sounds. Then like with one letter, pa, ma, ba. So with one letter, that's how like the language is going to acquire. The same process continues. Then like it's phrases. So it forms different words. Then they understand the meaning of different words. Then they form sentences. Then they start communicating with a meaningful statements. Okay, so with initially with the 2 to 3 letters, and they start communicating with more letters when it comes to the upper version. As age is getting older, then the exposure towards the language is more, and the acquisition of words and terminologies will be more. So in that case, kids also will start learning more number of words, and they start communicating well day by day. This is how like the building of language happens, the building blocks of language: phonemes, morphemes, phrases, sentences, and that starts communicating a different meaningful statements. Okay. So then it is like language acquisition. So how language acquires. So as I was telling you people, like I just explained you how kids will learn to speak. So how the exact process of development of language happens. Okay. Language acquisition. Language is the main vehicle by which we know about other people's thoughts. Okay. So unless and until we talk, we don't know what are we thinking. Okay. So unless and until others talk to you. So just because we study psychology or else we know a little bit about psychology, it doesn't mean that the moment we see others' faces, we can identify what exactly that person is thinking and all. So that is a falsification about psychology. So it is not so. So unless and until the people talk, so we don't understand anything. That is the power of language. Okay. So every time we try to speak, it reveals something or the other about your thought processes as well as language. So acquisition has different kinds of structures and different kinds of complexities within itself. So sometimes some languages feels easy, sometimes some languages some complicated things. So to talk to your neighborhoods or to talk to your family members, you don't have to phrase so much of complicated communication levels. Okay, so in that case, the acquisition of language, whatever the information that you have, feels so easy. But whenever you are in an interview, whenever you are in a professional field, so even though you are confident about your language, there is some kind of complexities that you feel. Okay, so that is like different complexities that we say in the languages. Okay, so in that case, we have stages of language acquisition. How do we acquire this language process? Okay, the very first stage is like ooing. Ooing means the sound. Okay, so oval sounds, mostly like, as I told you before, the kids will always, the newborns will always try to communicate with only sounds. Okay, so it's not even like that, the sounds will not even match with the alphabets or the actual language of whatever the language that we are speaking. It's only the sounds. They try to like create own characteristics of the own language. Okay, so then like in the next stage they started like babbling stage. So the language acquisition of infants is no longer like voices. So it's not only like voices. They start like babbling. They combine different voices together and they start babbling. Okay, then it is like one word utterance. So they start like speaking one letter, as I told you before, ma, pa. So all these things start continuously. So they start repeating the same terminologies again and again. Then with the two words or two letters utterance. So gradually by the age of 1.5 to 2 years of age, children starts combining single words to produce two words utterance. So they start combining little words together to form a statement. So in this particular age, kids will start asking only one word. If he needs water, so he doesn't say I need water. He just say water, food, chocolate, biscuit. So whatever is his need, he just mentions within a word or two words. Then like the basic adult sentences structure. So almost like in the presence of almost like nearly 4 years of age, the continuation in the vocabulary acquisition, so it expands rapidly. So by the age of 4 years, the kids will almost learn most of the words that adults speaks. Okay, so almost like more than triple from the 300 words. By the age of 2 years, it's almost like 1,000 words. 3 years, it's more than that. Okay, so by the age of 4 years, almost the kids is nearly matching the adult stage of language. So by the age of 5 years, most of the children also can understand to produce quite complex and uncommon sentences constructions. So they can construct their own sentences by the age of 5. Okay. So by the age of 10, children's language is almost fundamentally same as adults. By the age of 10, they seriously becomes like a adult language formation. So they come into existence with adult language formation, but the vocabulary will be little less. So as they experience new terminologies and new words, so they try to understand the complex words even still further. So even now we feel difficult, the new terminologies, the new dictionary words, so even we search in Google, so what is the meaning of this? So the except from the vocabulary, the stages of development has been completely reached towards the adult stage by the age of 10. Okay, so and then language acquisition and cognitive sciences. So language acquisition is not like inherently interesting, not only like inherently interesting, so studying it in one way looks like a concrete answer for the question. So wherein what is the relationship between the cognitive science and language acquisition? So this is the ultimate question. Okay, so whether really like language is coming from the cognition or else like cognition is based on the language. So there are kind of arguments which has came into existence, so in 1950s itself. Then it's like Chomsky so argued that language acquisitions is a falsified belief of a single stroke. So children learn languages that are governed by highly subtle and abstract principles, and they do so without explicit instructions or any other environmental clues to the nature such of such principles. That means that Chomsky argues that this language acquisition is a kind of falsified belief wherein children learn languages by learning highly like bounded principles. Okay, so as human talks they start imitating. Okay, so they start imitating and try to learn different kinds of aspects. So in that case, so he says that Chomsky completely disagree with the repetitions and the imitations of the language from the parents and other stuff. He clearly says that he explicitly disagree with the environmental clues and the natural principles that arises from the environment. So then our theories of the language acquisition. So as Chomsky disagree with all these things, so many theorists came into existence and they start arguing. So how different languages can be acquired. So with the different theories. Okay. So first one will be your behavioristic, innateness, cognitive theory, input and integrationist theories. So we have four different theories of language, and the very first one will be here. So behavioristic theory. So behavioristic theory says about it is from behaviorist Skinner. So he proposed a theory explaining the language acquisition in humans. So in verbal behavior. So whenever we talk, so we are showing some kind of behavior verbally. So it is also a sign of behavior. So even though like we are talking to somebody, just imagine you are doing some kind of actions without any language. So that doesn't mean like that is a kind of behavior. So behavior also involves verbal and non-verbal clues. Okay. So Skinner states that the basic processes our relation with the verbal behaviors is a spatial characteristics are now fairly well understood. So he says that, so let me explain. Like Skinner basically talks about the associations. He completely agrees with the repetitions and the imitations of the language. So whenever the kids tries to understand different languages, so Skinner specially says that children imitate adults. So their correct utterance, their so whenever like kids starts talking, so mothers or fathers will always like they put a reward. Okay, just say it again, say it again. They clap, or else like they provide all these reinforcements. So reinforcements are nothing but some kind of rewards. So which makes the behavior happen again and again. So if the kid is saying one particular sentence, so their parents are so happy that they want to repeat that particular behavior again and again. So in that case, they are going to give some chocolates or else some new toy. So that is a kind of reward. So just to get that reward, the kid will actually repeat the same sentences or the forming a different sentences again and again. So that's how Skinner speaks about language acquisition. So how language came into existence. Okay, so maybe like some kind of good praises. So all these things will be improving the language process in the kid. That's how the behaviorist theory explains how language acquisition happens. So Skinner basically like he tried to explain. So language happens through imitation process. They start imitating. So and then with the reward systems, all these kind of language process acquisition happens. Then like innateness. So innateness theory. So innateness theory again like it is a Chomsky's theory. So he proposed a criticism on behaviorist theory. So he completely disagree with the imitation process. So Chomsky concludes that so children will have some inborn capacity to acquire a language. Okay. So according to this theory, the process of biological determinants, so, as the baby is born itself, there is some kind of innate capacity for that particular child. So, which is making an circuit of linguistics. So, which contains a different circuit for a linguistic process from the birth itself. So he tries to conclude the language acquisition like that. So he completely disagree with the imitation process, and he just try to say that so there is some kind of innate capacity for an individual. There is a linguistic circuit which is present from the birth itself. So by that the kid will actually learn the language acquisition process. Okay, so then the next one is the cognitive theory. So in cognitive theory, so our Piaget starts talking about. So Piaget placed an acquisition language within a context of child cognitive development. So in the initial stage, the very first one Skinner says that so it is from the imitation. Okay, so then Chomsky says that so it is not from the imitation, it is the innate capacity of an individual to learn things with a circuit. So then the cognitive theory. So Piaget is a one who wanted to study about the cognition of kids. Okay, so he actually conducted an experiment on his own daughter and his own children, and along with his sister's children and everything. So he actually came to conclusion saying that so with the evidence and with the support, So there is some kind of different stages of cognitive development, wherein so even the language is coming under the cognitive development process. So he gives us a different stages of cognitive development. As Piaget says, it's a different cognitive levels, so which can make us to understand the different levels of languages. So, for example, for a LKG student or else like pre-KG student, so if I go teach 10th standard syllabus, so will you be able to understand that? So, not possible. So, Piaget is trying to say that only. So, according to the cognitive aspects, the level of cognition, children will understand the concepts and acquire a particular language in a different age. So, for 1 year of age, the kids will start learning only those particular cognitive aspects which he can learn. For 10 years, the cognitive processes, then the level of cognition is completely different. So then in that particular age, so how much ever he can comprehend, how much ever he can get to know the knowledge about the language, so in that particular age, so it is different. So with the different age, so we have a different cognitive levels. So through that cognitive levels, so kids will start developing the language acquisition process. So okay, so Piaget also gives us different stages of cognitive development, sorry, language development, that is sensory motor stage, pre-operational stage, operational stage, concrete operational stage, and formal operational stage. Okay, so these are the different stages that he gives. So wherein in this particular stages, so kids will start analyzing the language components differently. So they go from a simple to the complex events in life. Okay, so then the next one is so input or integrationist theory. So input and integrationist theory works on Chomsky. So this completely agrees with the Chomsky. So more recent theorists have stressed the importance of language input with the children receive from their caregivers. Okay. So okay, so this is contrast to the Chomsky. So this opposes the Chomsky theory. So this says that so whatever the caregivers is giving the information to the kids. So based on that, the language actually starts getting developed. Okay, language exists from the purpose of communication and can only be learnt in the context of interaction with people whom we want to communicate with and to what we want to communicate to others. Okay, so based on the interaction process, so if the kid doesn't have that motivation to tell you something, so he won't be having that motivation to learn that particular language. So kids actually, like, to be frank, so kids will have more motivational level compared to the humans. Since they cannot talk, at least they try to imitate, they spell wrong things first, so then gradually they get the sounds and the pronunciation skills properly, and they start communicating properly. They have that motivation to learn, to communicate exactly, to express what exactly they want to learn. So in that case, okay, so in that case, so this input and integrationist theory says that so whatever the caregivers or the parents are giving the input, so based on that, the language will be acquired. Okay, so and then we have the biology of language acquisition. So what are the different biologies? So biological structures that actually supports the language acquisition process. So human language is made possible by a special adaptation in human minds and the body. So it's not only the cognition process that is actually helping us to produce some kind of language. So it is also the human evaluation, and it is also the human body, physical body is actually supporting the language production. So how it is supporting? So whenever like the tongue has to become twisted, so we have different tongue twisters and everything. Different languages will have different positions of tongues. So we cannot speak the same way that we speak English. So different languages, Kannada has different, Hindi has different, Malayalam has different. So the most toughest language to speak is Malayalam. So they have different pronunciation. The tongue has to be twisted very strongly. The physiological events to support to produce the language is also very much important. And a larynx, so our throat and a vocal tract. Okay, so all these has to support independently to create a language. Okay, so we have, when I'm talking like this, so continuously my tongue has to twist, so I have to take air inside, I have to leave air inside, I have to produce a sound with the larynx and pharynx with the help of all these. So modification of the cavities, so how much mouth to open. So if I keep my mouth open, broad open, and try to talk, so I won't be able to communicate to you properly. Okay, so which kind of words need to be twisted like this? So each and every word has to be twisted differently. So biologically also, language acquisition is pretty important. So language acquisition is happening in two way. One thing is through your cognition process and the biological aspects of the body. So both are supporting together to produce a language. Okay, so and then your language processing. So in this, so we see functions of language. So why do we need this language? Okay, so whenever we try to cognate, so cognition, so whenever we try to link with cognition, language, and everything, so what is the purpose? What is the function of language? Okay, so language is useful because it can represent the ideas or events one has to represent. Okay, so if at all, like without language, just imagine. So the first movie, the silent movie. So I forgot the name of that. So the silent movie doesn't have any kind of dialogues or no communication. It's just that so human thoughts was communicated just by sign language. So in this particular generation, if it was like that, so what was our face? So how do we communicate? So if I had to take the online class, so it is just that without any voice, without any language, so you wouldn't have understood anything about the concept. Okay, so in the same way, so like whenever we have to communicate, represent the idea, or else give a kind of everyday experiences, explaining everyday experiences. So we utilize our symbols, speech, sound, our past experiences, so meanings, grammars, everything together to produce a language. Okay. So in a brief description, like Carls and Carls follows a different description about language. One thing is speech act. Okay, so speech act says that speaker normally intend to have some kind of influence on their listeners. So why am I speaking? So that is what is important, the function of language. So why am I speaking now? I have to give a lecture on a concept called language acquisition. That's why I'm speaking right now. Okay, so it depends on their listeners also. Sometimes whatever we have to speak, it depends on the listeners too. Okay, so speakers get the listeners recognition and the intention. So whenever we are trying to speak, so you guys know what is the intention behind this particular speech, so what is the act behind this particular speech. Okay, so to recognize this, to convey some kind of message, to convey some kind of representation of a concept, so speech act, so speech is or else language is pretty much important to convey some kind of information to a listeners. Okay, so that is one of the function of language. And then the next one is proportional content. So that is the second element of communication concerned with the proportional content of the sentences. So in communication, speakers want to convey certain kinds of ideas. Okay, so firstly they have to understand what exactly they are speaking. Okay, language is not only making others understand what exactly the person is feeling, so language is also important to make the speaker also understand what exactly he or she is trying to convey, what idea that he or she is conveying. Is it going appropriately to the listeners, or else whatever I'm saying and whatever you're getting is something different. Okay, so that is like proportional content. So proportionally, like it is giving a advantages to the listeners also, and it is giving the advantage to the speakers also. And then the next component is thematic structure. The third component in communication is thematic structure to communicate effectively. So good speaker pay careful attention towards their listeners. Okay, so they can actually judge, so lead the listeners to think in a certain way. So if I give some kind of examples right now, so I'll make you think in a different way wherever you are. Okay, so that is what is like I will give you a theme. So based on that, so with this particular language, the function of the language is to make you people get what others are getting conveyed. Okay, so what others want to convey about it. So if I say red rose, so you're thinking about red rose only. That's a theme. Okay. So the theme has been conveyed through the language. Okay. So these are different components of language which gives rise to different functions also. The speech act. So the main purpose why the speaker is actually speaking, whether the listeners is also getting the same. And the proportional content is something that whether the speaker has understood properly whatever he wants to convey, and whatever he's conveying is conveyed the same to the listeners or not. So thematic structures, so based on particular themes, so he pay attention towards a listener, so he can judge what exactly the listeners are listening, and he can actually gives rise to a different uh, lead to a listener's thinking, listener's cognition. So these are all the different functions of language. So we have different structures of languages too. So what are the different structures of language? Okay, so a theoretical intervention about the process which leads to the understanding of an utterance in communication should involve two aspects. Okay, so whenever we say structure of language, so each and every language will have different structures. So as I was telling you people before, so phenomes and morphones, so syntax, so all these things are different structures of languages, syntax, semantics. Okay, uh, all these together actually forms a language. Firstly, the aspects of language is linked to recognize the different forms of language itself. Okay, so to differentiate between the phonemes and to differentiate between 2 to 3 different sounds and letters, so then like forming a different terminologies or else like a word. These are all the first stages of structure of languages. Secondly, the questions about how the meaning of what is understood can be defined. So that is called as semantics. So semantics and fragmentics are these are completely into the meanings of the terminologies. So phonemes, morphones, and morphologies and syntax are with the sounds and production of words. So then comes the second aspect of language is understanding what exactly is the meaning of that particular word. Okay, that is what is like semantic and fragmentics in the communication process. Okay, so the structure of language has been divided into four different structures. That is like the basic unit of language that we already spoke about, that is phonemes and morphones, identifying different sounds and putting 2 to 3 different sounds together to form a letter. Okay, so then in a higher level of linguistic analysis, so as in the further steps, so we try to analyze different terminologies. So using this particular sounds, so we tend to create a what to say different words. So words function, so what are the different features of different words, different meanings of different words. So we try to analyze the different terminologies and different meanings of it. Okay, so then phase structure of sentences. So whenever the last step was higher level, so that is your second level of acquiring language. So once the language has been acquired through meanings, and the next is forming your own sentences to communicate. Okay, so you have to structure your own sentences based on the words that you know. Okay, so kids will form a very simple statements, so adults will form 2 to 3 sentences together in a one short speech. Okay, so it depends on the age and the level of maturity in the cognition. Okay, so third stage is forming a structural sentences to communicate, so whatever you want to communicate, and structure and a deep structure in the sentences. So deep structure in the sentences involves your grammatical aspects also. Okay, so kids are learning to form a sentence. So initially, like whenever kids try to talk, so there will be some kind of grammatical mistakes. Okay, so in that case, structure, the deep structure in sentences, so we are correcting the grammatical mistakes also. We are getting well versed with the grammatical aspects with the language acquisition process. Okay, so that is also the last one, that is structure, deep structure in the sentences. Okay. So, and then we have processes in languages. Okay, what are the different processes in languages? Production of language and speech perception and comprehension. Okay, so production of language, the beginning of the dialogue usually uh, usually produces speech with the participants, although the gestures and the signs may initiate such as the interaction to have a origin of similar verbal plans. Okay, so production of language is nothing but it's just a beginning of a dialogue to produce some kind of speech to one another. So where the participants are there, so you try to communicate some kind of dialogues based on the language acquisition process that you have already acquired. So you try to create some kind of language, so produce some kind of language to communicate with a person to person. Okay, so speech perception and comprehension. Okay, so this is the next stage. So you talk to other people and you try to convey something, and the next one is to understand the speech is a crucial human communication. Okay, so whatever others are talking to you, are you able to perceive the right thing, so comprehend what others are saying. Okay, so this is the fundamental language use, so that is happening in everyday life. So we try to talk to people for this purpose only. So whatever we are, others are perceiving, we are getting to know. So whatever we are perceiving, so others are getting to know through language. So we are comprehending using our language acquisition process, so along with the cognition. Okay, so this is like the process in language, different processes in a language that we use every day. So language development, so that we already spoke different stages of language development in the very first unit. So the same language development process come into existence. So first is phenomes and morphones, syntax and semantics and pragmatics. Okay, so these are the different language development processes. Okay, so then we have different models of language processing. So while processing, so we have two different kinds of processing, that is production of language and speech perception and comprehension. So based on this processes, there are lot many like models that has been created. Okay, so Kenchin's model of comprehension, so this model of comprehension is more than a system that deals with the way textual information is understood. So that means that this theory is that cut across many topics of cognitive psychology, which involves like memory, comprehension of written spoken languages. The model is based on a proportion. So the proportions is an abstraction and such as a difficult definition, which is actually concretely defined. That means that this particular model of comprehension, so as we discussed previously, comprehension and perception together. Okay, so what Kinston is trying to say is, so whatever we are talking, so it's not only like the way we talk directly, it's not exactly the textual information that we have to understand. So it's behind that particular textual information also. So like if somebody is saying that I need a break, okay, so that is a language which is saying that, so that person needs a break. But our cognitive psychology, which includes memory and comprehension and everything, so we'll give it, okay, this person is actually asking for a break. So what happened? So why this break is? Okay, so there is lot many cognitive psychological processes that come into existence. So this model is saying that it's not only the comprehension of the textual information has to be understood, so it is behind the textual information. So one is trying to communicate something else along with you. Okay, so abstraction, the abstractedness, the uniqueness. Okay, so the untold things also can be understood using a language. Okay, and the next model is so proportional representation of text and reading. Okay, so this model predicts that the sentences of greater proportional complexity are more difficult to comprehend than the sentences with a simple proportional structures. So this is like representation of text in and reading. So this is completely with the textual reading and the processes. He says that, so with the complex text, so or else like with the multiple sentences, if somebody is giving a paragraph, if somebody reads out the paragraph continuously till the end of the paragraph, it is pretty much difficult to comprehend, understand, and give the responses back. If somebody is giving a space between one particular statement, second statement, third statement, so you can understand the textual concepts and give the responses appropriately for the language or else the questions that has been arised through the communication process. That is what, like proportional representation of text and reading. Okay, so these two are models of language processing. So next is our multilingualism and cognition. So we have different peoples who talk multiple languages. Okay, multilinguistics. So they use different kinds of what to say, language. They switch between languages very frequently. So but they'll be talking in English, they suddenly switch to their own mother tongue, they again they talk something different, so they can switch between languages very quickly. Okay, so multilinguistics. So the structure of multilinguistics. So for many years, the popular belief was that so multilinguistic person should actually have learned the languages simultaneously in the early childhood. So there was a history which says that so those who are talking like multiple languages today, they used to think that they must have studied all these languages from the childhood itself. They must be knowing how to write, how to talk, so orally also written competence of that particular language. But today, in a broader definition, is more common. So accordingly, a person may be called as multilinguistics if he or she can manage switching between one particular language to other particular language, if it is like necessarily independently and symmetrically. Okay, if the language is correctly conveyed, if the language is independently conveyed, if the language is meaningfully conveyed, if the other person is understanding, if the person is able to modify the languages and he can give a proper meaning to it, so then it is like multilingualism in current trends. Okay, so previously multilingualism was a complicated language acquisition wherein people used to think that they have to know writing, reading, grammatical aspects and everything. But now it is not like that. So a person who can switch and convey the proper things to different languages, so then it is like a multilinguistic language process. Okay, so then multilingualism in India. Okay, so now India is a broad country wherein huge it has a huge population with different language. Okay, so almost in India, so it is like a we have almost 1620 mother tongues, which has been reduced to 200 languages. So this multilingualism chapter in of India represents that. So this almost like the cities with different cities. So in Mumbai and New Delhi, so the government has already been implemented saying that so in Mumbai, Delhi, and everywhere, four different languages has to be learned through school itself. So in India, like in Karnataka and other states of the country, so it is something like government has introduced three language formula. So kids will start learning Kannada or it's like first language English and Hindi compulsorily. Okay, so this is the rule with the multilingualism in India. So since we have multiple languages, so multiple mother tongues in India, so this is the condition. Government of India have introduced the three language formula in its educational system. So the first preference will be given to the mother tongue in few states, or else the first preference is given to English as first language, then comes the mother tongue, and the third language would be Hindi for compulsorily. Okay, so then multilingualism and cognition. So what is the level of cognition? Whenever we are trying to learn some kind of language, so we use lot many cognitions together. So it is something like memory, perception, so many aspects of cognitions are working together. Whenever it is a multilingualism, so how our cognition is actually working. Okay, so in relation between the languages and their users. Okay, so as we discussed before. Okay, so whenever like the languages has been acquired, okay, languages has been acquired, so different users, so okay, different multilinguistic people use different kinds of techniques. So whenever they are kids, it's easy to learn some kind of languages pretty much flexibly. Okay, for adults it is pretty much difficult to learn different languages. Okay, so basically because of two reasons. One thing is our cognitions becomes limited. Okay, so we tend to forget things very easily. So that particular language sound is something different, and we won't pay so much of attention to meaning of that particular word. We tend to forget. So if you don't repeat, we tend to forget. That is one reason. And so whenever we have to pronounce in a different manner with the different languages, so our bodily, our structural aspects of the body should support. So since we are adults, so our language acquisition structures has been completely developed now. For kids, it is still developing. The tongue can twist like however the kid is trying to. But for us, it is pretty much difficult to twist the tongues and produce a different sounds and everything. Okay. So in relation between the language and their uses. Okay. Then rules govern with the language choices. So this last two is something to do with the government acts. So wherein the rules and regulations to choose the languages. Okay, so for now, so everybody has the right to choose whichever the language they want. Okay, so but then, so that is one thing, and then the other rules like gone with the choices is something like, so whichever is flexible for that particular scenario. So in few particular states, so in New Delhi and everywhere, whether it is central government job or something like that, so you should know Hindi properly. Okay, so there are some kind of choice of languages is compulsory in certain scenarios. Okay, so then rules govern language choice also says that, so some kind of rules and regulations with the language also, as we were talking before, so the grammatical aspects has to be proper when it comes to the language process, whichever the language you're choosing, so the grammatical aspects has to be proper. Then the last one is, so mixing and rule govern too. Okay, so this is completely like our previous slide, so multilinguistic in India. So as government has different rules with the schools, so the multilinguistic aspects, so mixing up of different language and processing it. So because just because like we have different languages to give different knowledge about different languages, the rule is having a mixed languages, mixing up the rules of languages and mixing up different languages to give a clear idea about different multilinguistic processes. Okay, so then multilingualism and thinking, so how we are going to think with a multilingualism. Okay, so the relationship among the language proficiency, learning mode, learning style, so abstract reasoning, and the age of second language acquisition. Okay, so as I was discussing before, so whenever like it is a multilinguistic, so just imagine if in this particular age, if we have to learn a new language, okay, so how difficult it is for us. Okay, so the language proficiency, we have to understand everything about the language, the meaning of it, sounds of it, pronunciation of it, and everything. The learning mode. Okay, so are you trying to learn on your own? If somebody else is there to teach you some different languages, you have some kind of support. Learning style. Okay, so everybody uses different learning style. So people try to communicate with others with the different languages. So and then some people will try only like monologues. Okay, they start in front of the mirror, so they try to talk to themselves more. Okay, so then abstract reasoning, so how creatively you think about the language that you want to learn. Okay, so if you're not like associating the new language or the new word that you want to learn, so it is pretty hard for us to learn some new languages. We have to associate that with our old language. So if the meaning of this is so this is, for example, in English, onion is onion. So in Hindi, it is called as paj. So in Kannada, it is called as some iruli or something like that. So in these three languages, so it is one image that we are associating. So in that case, so we have to like abstractly reason, so this is what is called as so and so in different languages. Okay, so that is what is like abstract reasoning about. And the age that we try to learn the second language, that is also pretty much important, as it mentioned in a previous condition. So one thing is the physical aspect, that our pronunciation structure should cooperate, and then our cognition should cooperate. Okay, so then are other benefits of having a multilingualism. So this multilingualism actually helps us to be aware about the perception of different languages. So it was learning more languages is actually helpful for us. So there is some kind of experiment which is conducted on a university students. So there is a general survey which has been conducted, wherein in that particular survey, so 17 students were monolinguistics, so that is only 17 students know about one particular language. So 120 partial multilinguistics, that is, so half of the language, so they know to write or else they know to speak. Okay, so and 90 students were like so competent with the multilingualism. So in this particular survey, we can say that so most of the students in normal universities are getting well versed with multilingualism. So okay, so with this condition, they are coming up with different benefits of it. Okay, so they'll have a different awareness about languages, and they'll have pretty more vocabulary. Okay, so which enhances our perception skills also. Okay, and then for about like learning foreign languages enhance children understanding how language itself works as an ability to manipulate language to service the thinking and problem solving processes. So if we can learn more languages, if our cognition is so free to learn something new, so it's easy for us to think differently and solve different issues together. Okay, so it's not only with the foreign language learning, so it is also like applying for a multilinguistic languages that is present there in our country itself. Okay, so it develops not only better verbal but also a special abilities. Okay, so different pronunciation aspects and different level of speaking, different kind of what to say accents of speaking, sounds of speaking. So whenever we are talking in English, it's a different way that accent that we use, but whenever we are talking French, so it's a different accent that we use. Okay, so these are all the different other benefits that we have with the multilingualism and cognition. So how multilingualism will actually help us to have a different cognition. Okay, so acquisition of second language. Okay, so how acquisition of second language happens. Okay, a significant factor believed to contribute acquisition of second language is age. Okay, so as I mentioned before, so age plays an important role in acquiring a second language. Research has shown that some aspects of a second language, such as vocabulary comprehension, fluency, and seems to be acquired just as well after adolescence as before. Okay, so sometimes the comprehension and vocabularies can be understood pretty well after the adolescence period. So if I start like teaching a kid German or else like some other language, the vocabulary, the cognition level will be little bit less. Okay, so to comprehend, to understand the complex terminology. So after adolescence, the period, it is something like the acquisition period will be like pretty much easy after adolescence. He can listen to the proper pronunciation skills, and he can listen to the proper sounds. He can actually understand the meaning of the word. The mastery of the native like pronunciations and however it seems to be depend on the early acquisition. So age is one of the factor. So as like after the adolescent period, it is easy for us to understand the vocabulary part. But before the adolescent period, it is easy for us to have some kind of different pronunciation skills and tongue twist. So all these things will be acquired before the adolescence period to master certain aspects. So after the adolescent period, we have an advantage of having a more vocabulary aspects. Okay, then adults may appear to have harder times to learn the second language, so because of it can retain their native language as their dominant language. Okay, so as we become adults, as I told you before, so if we don't have a proper association with the previous language that we have, so it's easy, so it's difficult for us to learn a second language. How much ever we are trying to learn the second language, our previously learned language will dominate the second one. As young children, they're still in a learning process. They can easily learn and switch the languages appropriately. They can create a link between the previous language and the current language together, and they can learn a new language pretty much faster and easier than the adults. Okay, and then single system versus dual system hypothesis. So in this way, so hypothesis is just an assumption. So how actually the acquisition of second language works with different hypotheses. So in one way of approaching multilingualism to apply, so how the cognitive psychology research to practically concerned with this particular language acquisition. So the very first thing is like very first acquisition is sorry hypothesis is that the single system hypothesis suggests that two or more languages are represented in just one system of the brain region alternatively. So the first hypothesis says that so how much ever languages you learn, so it is just that the one system of the brain region, so which is switching from the language to language. Okay, so we have one Broca's area, we have one Wernicke's area. So wherein he says that the same like the nerve paths are pretty much different for different languages. But in a second hypothesis, the dual system hypothesis suggests that two or different languages are represented somehow in a separate system of the mind. Okay, so it is not so clear. There are still arguments which are going on. So the very first one makes sense actually because nobody has two Broca's area, nobody has two Wernicke's areas. It's all like so everybody has one particular structures of brain which is associated with the language and comprehension process. So in that case, the dual system of hypothesis suggests that the languages are represented somehow in a separate system of mind. So he doesn't say that it's a brain structure. He says that it is a separate system of the mind. So in a previous class we discussed, like in a very first class we discussed so the difference between a mind and brain, so where exactly brain mind is existing. Okay, so whenever like the person is switching from one particular language to other one, so he just switches the way he thinks. Okay, so he tries to associate the meanings of other languages whenever he is trying to speak in that particular language. Okay, so then the neural mechanism of multilingualism, so how our nervous system is actually supporting our multilingualism aspects. So researchers have found that so neuroanatomy of bilingualism are still contradictory to analyze. Okay, so whenever like it is a multiple languages, whenever we are trying to talk about multiple languages in a neural signals way, so it is still in a contradictory stage. Okay, so like whenever we try to communicate, everybody has different mother tongue. Okay, so everybody, most of the people knows English nowadays. Okay, so then it is like a bilingual establishment of um, language acquisition in each and every person. So in that case, so whenever we expose our brain signals through our scanning reports or something like that, so whenever we are thinking in one particular language, so whenever we are trying to communicate in other languages, the same areas of the brain are getting activated. So even though there is different context, even though there is different terminologies and the vocabularies that we are using, so our neural pathways, our neural pathways are not getting differed much. Okay, but it is still contradictory. We cannot say 100% that even the multilingualistic aspects are carrying out in the same neural paths. Okay, because whatever the information has been stored, which is stored in a different neural pathway itself. Okay, so whenever we're trying to communicate or whenever we are trying to do some kind of interactions or whenever we are trying to switch between multiple languages, so actually different aspects will be working, but we cannot draw an exact neural pathway, but some kind of differentiations can be found. Okay, so maybe like maybe we are whenever we are switching from mother tongue to the other complicated languages, so maybe some of the brain structures are getting more activated compared to the mother tongue languages. Okay, that is why it is still contradictory to identify the neural mechanism of the multilinguistic. So how exactly the nervous system supports our multilinguistic aspects biologically. Okay, so then it's your language and speech cognition disorders. So we have many like disorders as such. There are some disorders with the speech, some disorders with the cognition. So what are those things? So definition of language and speech disorders. Okay, so language and speech disorders, as said to be disorders, are impaired if they are differ from what is considered to the norms. So we have some kind of rules and regulations, as I told you before. So grammatical rules and regulations, and sounds of pronunciation, and different accents of pronunciation. So we have to follow all these things. So it is already indicated that so different cultural plays an important role in on different languages. Okay, so sometimes the cultural differences cannot be considered as disorders. So sometimes what happens is somebody has some kind of uh, tendency of saying pronouncing r with some other letter, pronouncing t with some other letter. So in that case, so that is what is considered as disorder. So when it is like cultural aspects or else some kind of physiological aspects, we don't consider it as a disorder. There is a genuine speech disorder for people's cultural tendencies or practices. Due to some of the cultural practices or due to some of the cultural tendencies, so human language has been become like that, so we don't consider them as a disorder. Apart from that, the impaired norms will be considered as the language disorders. We have different language disorders: aphasia, autism, and learning disorders, and we have many more. Okay, so what is this aphasia? Okay, so aphasia is an impairment of language functioning caused by the damage of left hemisphere of the brain. Okay, so aphasia is a condition wherein the person won't be able to communicate properly because of the damage in the left hemisphere. So left hemisphere will have this vernix aphasia. Okay, so vernix and Broca's area are the two main areas, so which is associated with the language production and comprehension. Okay, so in the left hemisphere, the vernix aphasia is causing a damage with the left temporal lobe of the brain. So it is characterized by the notable impairment in understanding of spoken words and sentences. The person will listen what exactly the person is talking to him, but he won't be able to understand those spoken languages and sentences. So once the Broca's area is damaged, so the person can listen, so the word will reach his brain, but he won't be able to understand what exactly the person is saying. Okay, so people with vernix aphasia have generally fluent phonic and syntactic, but when it comes to semantical speech, so he fails to understand. So he knows how to speak. The phonological content is fine and he can create sentences, but semantic is associated with the terminology meanings. Okay, so when it comes to meaningful communication, so he fails to communicate meaningfully. So he wanted to tell something, but he end up saying something else. Okay, so he starts to talk, but ultimately he forgets what exactly he wanted to talk. Okay, so which exact word to use, what is exactly the meaning of that particular word. So okay, that is what is like aphasia. He tends to forget the meaning of that particular words. And wernicke aphasia is caused by the damage to this left temporal lobe of the brain. Okay, it is a notable impairment of understanding the spoken sentences. So it's a repetition of that. So the global aphasia is a combination of highly impaired comprehension and production of speech, both. Okay, so it is causing a lesion of Broca's and Wernicke's area. So it has been experimented also on different animals. So the lesion has been created in the animals Broca's area and Wernicke's area. So this both has the capacity, the lesion has the capacity to deteriorate the combination of comprehension and speech production with the humans. Okay, that is what is like aphasia. Okay, then it is autism. So you must have heard about autism. Okay, autism is a condition with the little kids. So autism won't happen for adults. Okay, so autism is a developmental disorder characterized by abnormalities in social behavior, language, and cognition. Okay, so autism kids will have the tendency, majority of the autism kids will have the tendency with the ADHD, that is hyper um, okay, that is an hyperactivity disorder. So wherein, so with this autism we have a tendency, most of almost 70% of the autism kids will have hyperactivity deficit disorder. Okay, so in that case, so hyperactivity deficit disorder, so mechanism works like this. So whenever the kid is hyperactive, so he can't pay attention towards one activity more than certain period of time. He completely keeps on switching from activity to activity. So in that case, the language acquisition, so the thinking process, the cognition, so your mom is trying to say something, but you're hyperactive, so you tend to listen to 2 minutes and switch to some other activity, switch to some other activity. So in that case, language acquisition process becomes pretty much difficult. Okay, children with autism are identified by around 14 months of age, so when they fail to show expected normal patterns of interaction with others. So autism kids can be identified like the moment like it is 14 months, that is almost 1 year, 2 months of age. So we have certain kinds of norms, right? So whenever it is children, we try to communicate to them. At least they have to pay attention and communicate a little bit back towards the particular stimulus. So in that case, we try to understand whether the kid is actually facing a autistic symptoms, or else that he's not paying proper attention, or else in this particular condition, in this particular stage itself, parents will worry whether the kid is actually able to listen to whatever we are speaking much or not. Okay, so even the hearing um, disorders can be identified in this particular age. Okay, so children with autism shows abnormalities in many areas of brain, so including the frontal and parietal lobe, so as well as the cerebellum, brain stems, corpus callosum, basal ganglia, amygdala, and hippocampus. So in the previous yesterday we were discussing about memory, so how our memory has been compiled, consolidated, and stored in amygdala and hippocampus and everywhere. So autism kids will have a problem with majority of the cognitive aspect structures. So in that particular case, they won't be able to acquire a proper language in a proper age. Okay, so they might need more time, or else they may not appropriately learn the language itself. Okay, so then we have certain learning disabilities. So what is the difference between disorder and disability? Okay, so these are the two main concepts. So we cannot say something as a disorder and we cannot say something as a disability. Okay, so disorder is because, so as we were talking in the previous two conditions, autism and aphasia, so there is some kind of structural damage, so which is making or which is causing an language acquisition as a failure. So in that case, we call it as a disorder. So there is a physical damage in the order of the sequence, whether the person is trying to, whenever the person is trying to learn something new. That is like disorder. Due to the disorder, so the person is not able to perform certain activity. What is this disability? The order is appropriate, but the person is not able to perform properly. Okay, so hand fracture, so it's a disability, it's not a disorder. Okay, so the person has all the proper what to say, physiological structures, but he's not able to perform certain kind of activities due to some fracture. So it is like a reversible event. Okay, so disability, this is what is the difference between disorder and disability. Okay, so now we have certain learning disabilities. Okay, language based learning disabilities a problem with the age appropriate reading, spelling, writing. So with all these things we say it's a disability. So certain people will have some kind of developmental disorders, developmental delay, so because of that also this particular learning disabilities will come into existence. So we have different learning disabilities, that is dyslexia. The very first one is dyslexia. So this affects several different functions. Okay, we have visual dyslexia and characterized by the number of letters. Okay, so which is um, reversal and the inability to write symbols in a correct sequence. So if you have watched Tare Zameen Par movie, so you can understand dyslexia properly. Okay, so dyslexia is a tendency of a kids or a humans to create some kind of mismatch or else like a misarrangement of words. So we know the spelling of apple, apple, but whenever people or else a kid tries to write it, so he writes app, sorry, aplep. So something like that. So he dyslexia. Okay, the sequence is incorrect, or he doesn't pay proper attention. He doesn't group the proper terminologies. He jumbles up with the letters. Okay, so child's uh, facing a difficulty in holding or controlling pen or pencil with the age appropriateness. So almost like whenever it is pre-KG, it's almost like 3.5 years, or else 3 years. The kids will not have that fine motor skill properly, so you won't be able to hold the pencil appropriately and write a clear handwriting. But age appropriateness, after a certain period of time, if the kid is facing the same issue, that is also considered as dyslexia. Okay, so problem in holding the pencil, so creating some kind of issues with the writing aspect, so all these is considered as dyslexia. And then the next one is Alzheimer's disease. Okay, so Alzheimer's disease is with the older adult ones, adult versions. Okay, so because yes, so Alzheimer's disease is a brain disorder, so which leads to the discrepancy of language processing abilities. So gradually what happens, the language acquisition process, whatever has been learned, so because of this Alzheimer's disease, so everything will get deteriorated. So as aging happens, this happens is almost around 50 to 60 years of age. So this particular disorder will leads the brain cells to get damaged, the memory functions will get damaged, and the region, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area cell will start to get deteriorated and start to get dying with day by day. So in that particular stage, so there will be a lack of language proficiency. So even though the person is old enough, he had all the capacity to speak, so because of this particular disorder, or sorry, disease, uh, he fails to communicate properly after certain period of time. Okay, so then we have specific language. Okay, so specific language, the impairment of specific language impairment. Okay, so it's a developmental language disorder in the absence of frank neurological or sensory motor non-verbal cognitive or social emotional deficit. Okay, so this is something like which refers to the problem in acquisition and use of language. Okay, so whenever like we try to comprehend or talk to people, we should know whether the person knows the same language. Okay, so you are well versed with Tamil, and the person you are speaking with is well versed with Malayalam. Okay, so in that case, so specific language issues. Okay, nowadays what happens is, so this is a recent case that had encountered. So what happened is, so both mother and father is working in a different companies. So kid was actually like not talking to parents much. The parents were pretty much worried why my kid is not talking much. So the mother tongue is something different. So their mother tongue is Hindi. They are not the North Karnataka people. So their mother tongue is Hindi. They had appointed a caretaker wherein the caretaker is pretty much fluent in Kannada. Okay, the kid is talking to caretaker in Kannada so well, but the kid doesn't know how to talk in Hindi. Okay, so that is like a specific language issue. So this will start from the acquisition period itself. So whenever the language acquisition is happening, like from the childhood, so language starts acquiring after age of 6 months or something. So like he tries to communicate very hard, so he tried to imitate the parents and the caregivers. So in that particular time, the acquisition doesn't happen properly. So in that case, they end up with having a specific language issues. It's not like a language disorder, so it's a specific language issue. Maybe like if we are like well versed with Hindi, English, and our mother tongue. So if you have to talk something different, some other different languages, we too will face that specific language issue. Okay, so it's not so serious issue, but it's just a specific language issue whenever it is we are encountering different particular languages. Okay, so and the next one is
Ma'am, I
dis.
just have a small question here. Now,
Yes.
when we speak about this specific language impairment, do
Okay.
we consider it as a disorder or anything? Because as you explained, since the child is not heard, maybe it's not picked up that language, right?
It is not a disorder. Okay, it is
Huh,
a disability. So the structural
disability.
aspects and everything is fine with the kid.
Huh.
Okay, so
So,
just because the
hmm,
repetition of a particular language has not been continuously happened, the
hmm,
acquisition process, maybe the repetition, if I'm keep on telling one using one particular word, so
hmm.
that tries to imitate that one.
Okay.
Okay, so it's just an acquisition period.
Ah,
So how, if you're talking multiple languages, so whichever
hmm.
he acquires first.
Okay. Okay. So
Okay, that is what is like
yeah. So we don't consider it as any disorder or
disorder. No, 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 no.
disability, right, ma'am?
Likewise,
Yeah.
now we also face that specific language issue. If you
Yes,
ask me
ma'am.
to talk in Tamil, I don't know. So I
Ha,
haven't
that,
acquired that specific acquisition
yeah. I
language.
was just surprised how, why is this why is this being mentioned in this section? Because we are not talking about any disorder or anything. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Okay, 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 okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, yes. Then we move on. So it is dysphasia. So dysphasia is a developmental dysphasia disorder characterized by the impairment in the ability to plan and carry out the sensory and motor tasks generally. Okay. So now this question arises. So dysphasia. So this is a motor task generally. Okay, so whenever the sensory aspects itself is not happening properly, so we have a dysphasia issue. Okay, so with the environment processes, so we are not actually giving a clear picture to a particular kid, or else like symptoms vary from cooperation to different kinds of if the kid has a visual problem, that is also impairing the language. If the kid has an auditory problem, that is also creating some kind of issues. So if the kid has a perceptual difficulties, emotional and behavior problems, so difficulty in writing and speaking, so poor social skills, poor postures, poor short term memory. So with all these, dysphasia is something like is a disorder. Okay, so wherein the structural damage will leads to the failure of the acquisition process. The person won't be able to cooperate or listen to that particular. For example, dysphasia can also be involving one particular condition, whether whenever the kid is having some kind of hearing impairment. Okay, so the kid won't be able to produce a appropriate language. Okay, so he won't be able to listen to it properly. So in that case, this is a dysphasia. Okay, so which has been affected by the structural, the order of that particular uh, structure of that particular individual. Okay, so then it is like speech disorder. So whatever we saw is that the problem that is arising with a individual. So whenever it is a speech disorder,
Excuse me,
so
ma'am.
through speech. Okay, so speech
Excuse me,
disorder
ma'am.
is characterized by the difficulty in producing normal speech
Ma'am,
patterns. Yes.
ma'am, I have a question here. Apraxia is same as dypraxia?
No, 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 no. No, they both are completely different.
Ma'am, just
Dysphasia is
can I just
completely
explain
different and
what
dyslexia is
is?
completely different.
No,
Dysphasia
ma'am, I am
is due
asking
to the,
about apraxia.
sorry, apraxia.
Apraxia.
1 minute.
Hello. Ma'am, can you just explain me what is apraxia?
Yes, please, 1 minute.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, aphasia is a kind of loss of ability to execute or carry out some kind of skills or movement or gestures. So aphasia is something like it has been learnt. Okay, it's a loss of ability to execute. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, actually, what I read is it is also motor coordination and difficulty in the motor coordination.
Yes, of course. It is a difficulty in motor coordination, difficulty in gestures, and difficulty in physical abilities to perform certain tasks and perform certain skills. Okay, so aphasia is an loss of ability. The person was actually able to do something before. Okay, so
Okay.
but he has lost that particular ability to cooperate with that particular movements, gestures, and everything. But dysphasia is something that, so the person is having a difficulty in learning that particular ability itself.
Okay. Ma'am, but
Okay,
how the language is affected here?
for example, so
Yes, ma'am.
if uh, dysphasia, let me explain dysphasia. So if somebody has a structural damage, as I explained you before, if I have some kind of hearing issue, Okay, so I'm not
Okay.
able to hear properly. So the moment you are trying to talk, okay, so I'm not even able to get what are you talking about.
Okay.
Okay, so there is a block in the perceptual capacity itself. That is what is like dysphasia. But
This
what you're
this
talking about aprasia is something like it's a loss of ability. The person was able to work before, but he has lost
okay.
the ability now to execute or carry out the skills of movements or gestures or something like that.
Ma'am, it is also it is a problem for language.
No, this aphasia, it's completely with the skills. So execution abilities, movements and gestures and everything. But this phrasia is something like the acquisition itself is not happening properly due to the problems that I have mentioned here. Perceptual difficulties, emotional and behavioral problems, difficulty with writing, reading. With all these issues, the person itself is having a problem in acquisition itself. The person is not, how much ever you teach a kid, okay,
Okay.
is not able to grasp that itself.
Okay. So, ma'am,
Okay,
these both disorders are found in children's or adults?
so this is found, this phrasia is found in especially with the kids because acquisition period and everything happens before the adolescent period, but aphasia can happen in adults itself because
Okay.
once the ability has been learnt, so then the person has lost the ability to do something.
Okay, ma'am. Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, yeah, so then we move on to our speech disorders. So, speech disorders are characterized by difficulty in producing a normal speech pattern. Okay, so for example, like some people will talk very fast, some will talk very slow. Okay, so some will not give appropriate spatial gap between words. So some will not. So in overall things, so people will not be able to speak normally. So they'll have some kind of issues with the vocal utterance or language and uh, voices, articulations, and the fluency. So they'll have difficulty in, they know what exactly they want to speak, but whenever they're trying to speak, the speech is not coming out appropriately. Okay, so these disorder includes voice disorder, so abnormalities in pitch, volume, vocal quality. So people wants to convey something, but their voice is not so clear, the sound is something different, maybe their pronunciation skills are something different. They wanted to pronunciate something, but they ended up pronunciating something different. And then speed sound disorder, articulation disorder. So that means problem in production of speech sound with the appropriate uh, sounds. So for example, so as I told you before, round. So many people doesn't have the capacity to uh, produce the sound R. Okay, they might end up producing some other kind of sound instead of R. And we have T. So many people cannot pronounce T. Okay, so that is like the speed sound articulation production also, and then speed with the speed. Okay, so people wants to convey something, they'll be very fast, they'll be very slow. Okay, so people, other people won't be able to understand what exactly they're trying to communicate. Okay, and then the next one is fluency disorder, so impairment in the normal rate of rhythm of speech, such as for example, like there some will be having stuttering issues, stammering issues, and some will have a tongue twisting issues. Okay, some cannot, like somebody will be talking, all of a sudden their tongue will get stuck, they won't be able to speak properly. That is like fluency disorders. Okay, with the speech, so we have all these different disorders. Then we have voice disorders. Okay, so voice disorders involves the cooperation effects from the lungs, larynx, vocal cord, and the nasal passage to produce a recognizable sound. So whenever we are speaking, so it is so hard. So how many organs have to cooperate? Lungs, larynx, vocal cord, nasal passage. So all these have to coordinate with us to produce a proper voice. Okay, so if one of these, so whenever the throat is blocked, okay, so your voice is something different. Okay, so whenever you have cold, your voice will get changed because of this reason. Okay, so whenever you should have a proper voice, so you should have all these organs working properly. So voice can thus be considered disordered if there is some kind of incorrected aspects in these structures. Okay, so whenever we say phonemes, so phonemes are completely with the sounds. Okay, so this sounds was also pronounced because of the uh, in different, it could be like breathy, strained, husky, horsey. So we differentiate different voices, right? So whenever the air is produced more, we say it is breathy, strained. So whenever we are tired, we talk little low and husky. So different kinds of voices. So we tend to have some kind of uh, hypernasivity and hyponasivity. The voice disorder can also be due to improper voicing habits. Okay, so somebody will actually try to imitate some other accents, though their voice becomes completely different. Okay, maybe because of due to other medication, some other what to say, reactions might have happened and the voice might have changed. Okay, so with this voice disorders, so we have different kinds of it. Okay, so based on the volume, how loudly or how softly you can speak, some will have an issue how much ever they try to scream, so their voice will be up to certain level only, they cannot talk more. So they try and they talk like whispering. Okay, so how we whisper, that is the maximum volume that they can give. Pitch, how pleasantly or unpleasantly you speak. So if I start screaming, so if I'm talking in a normal tone, okay, so if I put more pitch, okay, so your voice, your all your ears will be gone, whether I'm talking pleasantly or unpleasantly. So all songs will be very much pleasant because the pitch is slow, very slow. Okay, so all noises will be very unpleasant because all of a sudden the pitch is more. Okay, so in that case, the quality of voices, okay, the highness, lowness of the voice. So you should know like how to modify your voices. If somebody, so if I'm talking in a classroom, I should know which kind of quality that I have to give, which kind of volume that I have to give. But everybody should listen from first bench to last bench, but nobody should get irritated. Okay, we should know the quality of the voice. So everybody has to understand the pronunciation, the terminology. So whatever we are speaking, it should be appropriate and clear to the listeners. And the rate. So in what speed we are speaking to others. If I continuously talk like 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, so nobody can understand. So since you guys know 1 2 3 4, you must have understood now. So in that case, if I start talking like this very fastly, so you won't be able to understand. So we say come again. So the same thing happens. The rate of the voice that you speak, okay, that is also important. Okay, and the next one is speech sound disorders. Okay, so whatever we saw now is voice disorders. Now speech sound disorders. So for some people, as I told you, like they cannot produce some kind of sounds. So we have two different kinds of disorders: articulation disorder and phonemic disorders. So articulation involves the use of tongue, lip, teeth, mouth to produce the recognizable speech sound. So we have to like say p. So our two lips has to like touch each other. So we have certain kinds of pronunciating skills. For example, like somebody who has a cleft lip or a cleft palate, tongue ties. Okay, so as I told you before, for while speaking, for some people the tongue will get stuck. Okay, so due to some accidents or something like that, so somebody's structure of lip, so cleft palate you must have heard about. Okay, so lip structures are not proper, in that case they won't be able to produce some kind of sounds. Okay, so maybe because of other reasons like uh, faulty or incomplete learning so of sound system or damage in the nervous system. So due to damage in the nervous system also, these articulation issues might also happen. So whenever you have to speak in a different pronunciation, you have to have a proper neurological connections also to twist your tongue, to make movements in the mouth. So you guys must have heard about cerebral palsy, facial palsy. Okay, so whenever somebody with a facial palsy or paralysis or something like that, so all the nervous systems will be damaged in the face also. Okay, so in that case he won't be able to produce even though he has a proper lip structure, tongue structure, everything. So if the nervous system is not supporting for an individual to speak in appropriate manner, so it won't produce a proper sound. Then it is the next one, the phenomic disorder. Phenomic disorder is something to do with the physical production of certain sounds only. As I told you before, so somebody will have a problem in producing only one sound. For example, R, round, somebody will pronounce it as sound. Okay, so they will have some issues pronouncing only particular sounds, phonemes. Okay, so other than that, they'll have alternative sounds. Other than that, they don't have much other different difficulties in that. Okay, so then we have a fluency disorder. So what is this fluency disorder? Fluency involves the appropriate pauses and hesitations to keep speech sounds recognizable. Okay, so fluency is not that only the speed is considered, so how well you can talk, so the vocabulary, it's not only the fluency. Okay, so how well you make your language sensible to others, recognizable to others. Okay, fluency disorder is sound are very rapid sometimes. Okay, so giving some kind of extra sounds cluttered, so because of the stuttering, stammering issues, so some people will start like pronouncing some sounds repeatedly. Okay, so fluency disorders are more prevalent in children's. Basically from the childhood itself it starts fluency disorders. Okay, so with a combination of familial, psychological, neurological and motor factors. Okay, so if it is happening in the age of adolescence or something like that, maybe because of some neurological damage it must have started. Fluency disorders usually starts in the almost first year of language acquisition period itself. So whenever the person or else the kid is trying to speak, so he'll have that cluttering, stammering and stuttering issues. Okay, so that is what is like fluency disorder. Okay,
Ma'am,
so Aprecia,
excuse me, ma'am.
yes please.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yeah.
Ma'am, if they have damage in the means nervous system, then
Okay.
is there any treatment for it, or
uh
other than speech therapy?
Other than speech therapy, we can only say physiotherapy. So the nerves will get regenerated only with the physiotherapies. Other than that, we don't have any particular medicines which triggers only that particular nervous system.
Okay,
Okay, so
okay,
only
okay,
we
ma'am. Thank
cannot
you.
identify, or else like we have in abroad it is followed nowadays. Like we have certain medications which is targeted only for that particular nerve. Okay, they target that particular nerve and inject
Okay,
certain kinds of needed enzymes and hormones inside that particular neuron to regenerate that particular system. So how we
okay,
have different technical technologies to remove the blocks in the blood blocks and everything in the this thing brain damage and everywhere. The
okay.
same mechanisms
Ma'am,
is used in abroad to regenerate the nervous system by targeting some kind of enzymes, injecting some kind of enzymes and some kind of medications in that particular targeted pathway.
ma'am, in this case, music therapy and all that works.
Sometimes we cannot assure 100%. So even though like music therapy, fluency when the person is already having stuttering and stammering issues, so sometimes it works well. Okay, so whenever he's
Okay,
talking in a fluent, low pitch manner, the sounds might come all of a sudden sometimes. But whenever he's talking in a normal tone, that would be pretty much difficult because fluency
okay.
in singing is something different. Fluency whenever we are talking normally is something different.
Ma'am, I'm talking about music therapy.
Music therapy also, whenever you give a music therapy, the person feel
Okay,
confidence to talk. Okay, so that particular
okay,
activity will not be corrected 100%. Stuttering and stammering issues will not reduce for 100%, so maybe for 20 to 30% it might reduce. Okay,
Okay,
so
ma'am.
musical therapy will help an individual. So whenever it is a musical therapy, the person will try to communicate things. He learns to sing in a different manner, with using a different fluency, different pitch, different tone, and everything. That's what I'm trying to say. Music is something
Okay.
different. The normal conversation is completely different. So why we give
Okay.
music therapy is that so the person will be able to speak confidently in front of others.
Okay, ma'am.
That is one thing. So stuttering and stammering people will have an inferiority complex previously. Okay. So with this
Okay.
music therapy, so whenever they are exposed to different people, so whenever they feel that they can also like fluently sing, at least they'll get a confidence to talk
Okay.
boldly in front of others. That is one mechanism that we use with the music therapy. That is a hidden technique in the music therapy. It's not that it cures the stuttering and stammering and fluency issues 100%.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So as you asked me before, so aphasia of speech. So aphasia of movements are completely different. Okay. So yeah, aphasia or dysphasia. So this is giving a almost the same similar touch. So aphasia of speech is also known as verbal aphasia or dysphasia. So it's a speech disorder in which the person has trouble saying what he or she wanted to convey properly. So as I was telling you before, so this has some kind of different issues. The structural issue maybe sometimes, or else like because of other psychological issues or something like that, whatever the person wanted to convey, so you won't be able to convey. So dysphasia is condition wherein there is acquisition problem also. Aphasia is something that so he has the ability to speech, but he is not able to convey it properly, correctly, consistently because of the conditions. Okay, so we have two different kinds of aphasia of speech. One is acquired aphasia of speech, and the next one is developmental aphasia of speech. So aphasia of speech is something that so it affects the person with any age. Okay, so maybe because of the accidents or a damage in the brain, or else like some kind of neural damage, so which affects the Broca's area or Wernicke's area, which has to be produced with the communication process. So in that case, so this aphasia has been acquired. Okay, so developmental aphasia occurs through the childhood itself. Okay, so through the childhood itself, because of some kind of several issues involved in developmental verbal aphasia, or it's like some kind of articulation issues or some kind of neurological damage or structural damage. So this has been developmentally happening through the speech deterioration. So we have two different kinds of aphasias when it comes to speech. So acquired one and then developmental aphasia. Okay. So and then we have dysprosody. So dysprosody is a condition wherein this happens very rarely. So, dysprosody is the rarest neurological speech disorder. It is characterized by the alteration in the intensity, in which, so in the timings of the utterance segments, the rhythm. So, and the intonation of the words. So whenever like in this disorder there is a neural damage. Okay, so neurological speech damage wherein the person won't be able to control the speed or else the articulations or the utterance segments. Okay, he wants to convey something but the neurons are not supporting to stop that, so he continuously with one speed he tries to convey everything without any space or something like that. He tries to speak and finish off the things. That is like dysprosody. Okay, so dysprosody is a rarest condition, so it is completely because of the neurological damage. Okay, so and then dysarthria. Okay, so dysarthria is a motor speech disorder. So it is a weakness of an individual due to the paralysis or else the speech muscle damage or else a neural damage. These two conditions are based on a neurological damage. Okay, so one is dysprosody and dysarthria. Okay, so this is due to the dysarthria is completely due to the paralysis condition. As I told you before, it's a facial palsy Okay, so this deteriorates or else like this damages the neural connection in the faces, which actually like creates an issue in pronouncing different kinds of sounds, articulations, and pronouncing different kinds of language, and they know exactly what is the meaning of it, how to talk, but their structures and the nervous system won't support them to talk properly. Okay, yes. So this is about the different disorders of your language. So this ends your third block completely. Okay, so this is all about your language development, language acquisition, and different theories of language that we discussed. So different disorders and acquisition, different stages, development of language acquisition. Okay, so all these are like pretty much important in the cognition processes. Okay, so I'll be sending this PPTs also. So I have already sent two PPTs of two different blocks, so you guys can go through. Okay, so even this PPT I'll be sending it very shortly. Okay, so if you guys have any doubts, so you guys can mail me through my mail ID. Okay, so we have only 10 minutes left, so I think we can end our session for today. Okay, thank you so much. So if you guys have
Ma'am,
any doubts,
Ma'am, I have
ma'am,
a question.
where have you emailed the previous PPTs, ma'am? I'm sorry.
so I have sent it to Emma ma'am also. Those who have personally mailed me, I have
Mhm.
sent the PPTs
I have
personally to
already
them
mailed them,
also.
madam.
I think
Hema ma'am, you've
I must
already.
have replied.
Students, please check the mails, okay?
Okay, Hema ma'am, if you've done it, thank you, ma'am. Sorry, I probably haven't checked it
Yeah,
then.
yeah, it's okay because just 1 hour back I have sent. You just check the
Okay.
PPTs.
Yes, we've got
Then,
the
And
block one
today's
and
PPT
block.
also I'll be sending. Okay.
oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for that.
We've already received it, ma'am. Thank you so
Ma'am
much.
received it. I
Okay
received
then.
it. Thank you,
Yeah,
ma'am.
thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Hemamandi ma'am, do you have Sindhuja ma'am's presentations or anybody have you received it by email?
Yeah, not, I will ask them,
No.
madam. I'll send the PPTs. I'll ask them,
Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
then I will send you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Ma'am, even please share the recordings, no? So that whenever
Recordings,
we
I
are
have asked our computer section to convert it into the YouTube links. Okay. There is some
okay, ma'am.
issue. I'll be
Mhm.
sending maybe the next week.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am.
Hello,
Thank you,
ma'am.
madam.
Some recordings were shared asking for an access, ma'am. It's not accessible.
Yeah, that is the issue. So here they have some problems for that. So
Okay.
they are converting into the YouTube links. Then we will send it.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
Nitya, madam, I think session is over. Madam,
Ma'am?
yeah, can leave the session,
Yes,
madam.
ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sure.
Okay.
Sure, sure,
No,
sure,
no.
sure.
You know, if they have any questions, it's okay. No issue.
Okay,
Yeah,
ma'am.
Nitya
Okay,
ma'am, I
okay.
have a question. Yeah.
Yes, please,
Hello.
sir. Yes, 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 yes,
Yeah,
yes. Please tell me.
yeah. See, are there any studies done
Sorry?
the intelligence to the language acquisition in the sense how does it, what bearing does it have on language acquisition from an intelligence or a creativity perspective?
Intelligence and creativity perspective, it
To
happens.
a
Okay,
language.
language acquisition process is something that which happens through the innate capacity of an individual also. Somebody will acquire the language very quickly based on the creativity and intelligence too. So these two will definitely affect the language acquisition process. So those who are like pretty much intelligent, they have the more grasping capacity, good grasping capacity, so good abstract thinking and creative thinking. So in that case, they have a tendency to learn, acquire the language pretty much fast.
Okay, yeah. So it is like in the sense, see, I've seen cases where people are not necessarily technically very, I mean, in the sense, great technically, but they have
Okay.
a language acquisition skill.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
In that
they
case,
are not
exactly.
intelligent technically. So, but they have very good language acquisition skills.
Exactly.
Hence,
Like we have different intelligence also, like as we discussed in the previous one. Some will be good at verbal, some will be good at non-verbal, some will be good at technical, clerical intelligence. So in that case, like language intelligence is completely linguistic intelligence also might be involved. So in that case, they can create an association between the already learned language and the new language, and they can learn the language very quickly.
sure, yeah. So that's what I
Yeah,
wanted. Thank you.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. Okay, I hope we can end the session. So if you guys have any other doubts also, you can mail me. So I'll just forward this PPT also to Hema ma'am so you guys can receive it. Okay?
Okay, madam. Thank you very much, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you all. We can leave the session now.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a nice session.